Story 1. My dad had a wall he called the Wall of Shame. It displayed many awards he won for his work for the city. He called it that because at 50 it had taken him that long to get his life together and start making a living after we had been poor our whole lives. He used it as an object lesson about not wasting your life and about the importance of getting an education. Story 2. Don't turn out like me. Just look at my life, son. It's terrible. You are on the same path. Story 3. This did not happen when I was a teenager. It happened when I was a little kid. I stole a Mighty Max, which was like Polly Pocket for boys. I was about 6 and I got caught. I expected my parents to spank me, but they sat down and had a serious discussion with me about how stealing is wrong. I never stole again, and to this day I feel a strong revulsion toward people who steal. Story 4. If you need ideas, take your kids to someplace unfamiliar. If you live in the suburbs, take them to Times Square and let them see how big the world is. If you live in the city, take them to a small town and, in an appropriate way, show them how other people live. Story 5. My parents showed me love and support and constantly told me they were there for me. Their ongoing, open communication and refusal to let me feel unloved made me realize the consequences of my actions. Their care helped me see how my choices hurt not only me but everyone around me. Story 6. You are giving up on yourself. Please do not give up, my mother said after I attempted suicide. Story 7. The company you keep determines the situations you will be in. In other words, if you associate with sketchy people, you are likely to end up in disreputable situations. Story 8. When I was having a very hard time choosing to remain alive, my mother told me I had to stay around long enough to share my stories. She said she would not want other people to tell my much younger sibling who I was. She asked me to hang on so he would have real memories, not just other people's stories. She told me that if I held on long enough for him to be able to miss his big sister and not only the idea of her, she would forgive me and let me go. So I held on so he would have memories, and slowly I healed. She got me into therapy and different activities to help me hold on a little longer for him. It has been 30 years, and I will always love and appreciate how painful it must have been for her to say she would let me go in order to make me hold on. My life has been worth the wait. Story 9. It wasn't my parents but my grandmother. She lived with my parents for as long as I can remember and raised me and my siblings more than our parents did. She told me to look at my mother's life and ask whether I really wanted to live the same life for the next 50 years. My mother had my oldest sister at 19, entered a shotgun marriage because this was Alabama in the 1980s, became a raging alcoholic along with my father, and suffered frequent physical abuse from him when he drank, a pattern that continued into their 50s. I definitely did not want that life. It made me realize that life-altering changes were not some nebulous possibility in the future. The choices I was making at 16 could set the path of my life in stone. Story 10. I'm disappointed in you. That's all it fucking took. I basically never made bad choices, and now I wish I had. I've barely lived. Story 11. My abusive father had a stroke when I was 13 and has lived in a care home since. My early teen years were filled with suicidal thoughts, depression, and anger because I had no idea how to cope. I remember venting to my mother a lot about how angry I was that she did not protect me, which left her crying a few times. When I was 14, we were at the beach with my mother's friend. My mother explained that she had faced questions from the nursing staff about why they should not take him home. She always told them he was abusive and that she had a daughter at home she needed to protect. Hearing her cry when I said I wanted to kill myself was a wake-up call and put things into perspective for me. She did not divorce him earlier because she worried about custody and that I would have to be alone with him during visits. She has always been a wonderful mother and took the brunt of the abuse. She even told me she did not regret marrying my father because I came out of it. So I try my best for her every day. I wish I could have been a better daughter. Story 12. When I was 16, I let a cheerleader drive my Camaro and she ran it into a ditch. We got it out, but everyone at my small-town high school had heard about it by the time I had it cleaned and returned home. So I knew I had to come clean before my dad heard it from someone else. We sat down and I told him everything that happened. He tapped out his pipe, which he had been smoking. He looked me in the eyes and said, Kim, you're but 69. Stop being stupid. I said, I'm trying, Dad. Story 13. My mom told me to always be ready to support myself and any children I had, because I could not completely depend on someone else. They leave, they die, or they are just assholes. Her words, not mine. Story 14. I held myself accountable. My parents expected us children to cater to them, not the other way around. If something needed to be done, that's what children are for, was the answer. They were authoritarian. I lived a life of, is that really your best? Being asked of me with threats about how doing poorly would impact my future. Lower grades resulted in them saying one day I would be asking paper or plastic, or, would you like fries with that, if that was the best I could do. In short, their high expectations caused stress and also gave me high expectations of myself. I hate letting people down, but I am better now at judging whether expectations are reasonable. Now I rarely deal with depression. I would not recommend that parenting style for most children, but all of my siblings and I are successful, so it worked in a way. I do not like them much today because of their selfishness. Story 15. My dad had a lot of great things to say. Unfortunately, I did not take them to heart until I was an adult. Almost every day something happens that reminds me of advice he gave or warnings he predicted, and I think you called it. I knew he was right even when I was a teenager, but I had to find out for myself. It was only after I learned the hard way and grew up a bit that I could take his wisdom and apply it to my life. Now I have a daughter like me, making the same mistakes I made, only with my husband's stubbornness, and I find myself thinking, sorry, Dad. I was lucky with my father. He had to make up for my mother not being around, and he did a very good job. I fully credit him for the standards I set for the kind of man I wanted to marry and have children with. That is what I am most grateful for. My kids will feel the same once they are old enough to truly see how awesome their dad is. Story 16. It is your life. If you do something wrong, be prepared for the consequences. Don't do the crime if you can't do the time. The same applies to life in general. My best tip came from my dad. He had a friend who worked high up in the insurance industry. My dad himself had a regular movie theater job in high school. His friend told him, "Son, in life and work it is more who you know than what you know. Networking helps, but you have to socialize." Both my parents went to college but were not from wealthy families. My dad used the Bill, Servicemen's Readjustment Act, and my mom used college grants for science programs. They would always say, education, they cannot take that away from you. After COVID-19, coronavirus disease 2019, I was more introverted, but I have good work relationships now. Not a huge network, but a good one. There are local networking groups for many interests. I joined a city remote workers, Slack workspace with meetups. Meetup is another option. Story 17. I had helicopter parents. I did not make a decision for myself until I was 29. Story 18. I did not like bologna sandwiches. I used to get into fights at school. My mother said that in prison they only eat bologna, and because it is prison the food is much lower quality. I have not gotten into a fight since, because she warned that next year in high school it could lead to prison. Story 19. They said, take a look at your brother. Do you want to end up like that? Story 20. My parent didn't yell. They just said, I thought you were smarter than that. That one line hit harder than any punishment. Story 21. My brother had a problem driving dangerously and even crashed when he was a teenager. I told him I had been reckless at his age too, and I was not even mad about the money, but our grandmother would really appreciate not having to keep burying family members. My grandparents had 4 children. My father was the only one to survive to adulthood. Uncle Edwin died because someone was driving drunk, and my brother has Edwin as a middle name. To my brother's credit, the incident affected him, and he says he plans to use that lesson when my nieces and nephews start driving. Story 22. My parents said relatively little that was constructive. I still loved them with every fiber of my being, though. They tried. Their upbringing was not very good either. I was fairly moral and did not lie or steal. I was a flower child and very elusive. Story 23. Your grandfather would be incredibly disappointed in you. The name of the game in our household was emotional manipulation and zero accountability. Story 24. As a teenager, my parents never gave two hoots about what I did as long as I did not embarrass them. They had children because it was the thing to do, not because they wanted to raise us into useful or happy adults. Funnily enough, half of us now work in social care. Recently, my aging father told me he had not expected me to turn out so successful. By that he meant stable employment, a long-term job, being married for many years, and owning our home, all achieved on our own. Take from that what you will. Story 25. My mother said over the telephone these magical and heartwarming words. You are going to stay there until I get up in the morning. I was 16 and in jail for driving while intoxicated and for reckless driving. The funny thing was my mother was an extreme early bird. She went to bed around 8 and would be up at 3 or 3:30. She overslept that Saturday morning and did not wander in until almost 9. Story 26. This was when I was in my early teens. My father clocked me at about 40 miles per hour down a hill on my mountain bike. He sat me down that night and told me that while going fast is fun, I really ought to think about how fast I want to be going when something goes wrong, because you never know when something unpredictable might pitch you over the handlebars. It has been a great reminder to consider the possible consequences before taking a risky action. Story 27. After years of arguing about my messy room, my dad came into my room after another argument with my mom and told me a story, possibly not true, about a roommate who never cleaned and one day found a rat under a pile of clothes. That horrified me enough that I have kept my room clean ever since. Story 28. If I catch you smoking, I will kick all your teeth out. I used to hang out late into the darkness during summer school breaks, and some older kids were smoking. Fun times. Story 29. My dad would know instantly if I had smoked a cigarette. Story 30. If you ever feel the need to experiment with drugs or other substances, let us know and do it at home so we can keep an eye on you. Instant trust meant I never had to hide anything. I did not feel the need to go behind their backs or sneak around. Story 31. It was not my parents who picked us up, but my friend's father. She had been caught stealing from a gas station, and I had been waiting for her outside. He made me get out of the car and told me I should not be friends with her anymore, saying I would end up like her. I moved away and saw her a couple of times after that. She went downhill quickly, went to rehab several times, and who knows what else. Story 32. I need to be able to trust you. After this, I don't know how long it will take before I can again. It hit me hard as a child that my mom was trying to let me live my own life but needed me to act like an adult to match the level of trust she gave me. Story 33. I am a third-generation car enthusiast. My father has been building race cars and vintage Mopar vehicles since the 1960s, and I spent my childhood in his garage. By the time I was old enough to drive, I had a couple of cars. A 17-year-old had no business driving. I daily drove a Mitsubishi Starion that would run high 12-second quarter-mile times and a 1973 Challenger with a big block stroker motor producing over 600 horsepower. To my father's credit, he put me in go-karts and on dirt bikes starting in kindergarten, so I was not completely unprepared for driving powerful cars. One morning in my late teens, he woke me and asked me to take a drive with him. The night before, a friend's younger brother had been out with his buddies on back roads and lost control of his Integra, resulting in a high-speed collision with a tree. My father knew the tow truck driver and took me the next morning to see what was left of the car. There was not much left. Of the 4 kids in the car, only one survived. On the drive home, we talked about consequences and how one careless moment can quickly become life-changing, not just for me but for others. It can end lives and scar families throughout the community, with effects that cannot be undone. Story 34. They didn't say anything. They just looked disappointed, and honestly that was far worse than any lecture. Story 35. I was the good kid. I made no bad decisions. Any mistakes were due to poor time management or forgetfulness, not poor judgment. Story 36. A man's character is known by what he does in the dark. Dad said this to me when I was going to visit my old high school girlfriend in another town. Story 37. Have fun, but be careful. I told my now adult daughters to have fun and not do anything stupid. They knew the stupid things other kids did back then. I let them decide what was stupid, and for the most part it worked. Story 38. They knew nothing about the bad choices. At times they must have suspected something was happening, but they had no idea what or how extensive it was. I know my parents. If they had known, they would have raised me very differently. Story 39. One time my mom looked me in the eyes, almost like an adult, and told me, "You're not a very good person right now." It sounds kind of silly thinking back, but I was so taken aback that I don't remember what I had done. It definitely didn't happen again. Story 40. When I did badly in my General Certificate of Secondary Education examinations, my parents were not even upset. They just expected it. By my advanced level qualifications, I had my act together. Story 41. My dad had a lot of good ones. He told me once how disappointed he was in me when he caught me in a lie, and that he didn't know how long it would take before he could trust me again. That hit me really hard. It was the way he said it that made me feel terrible. Story 42. My father was smart. He knew he could not just give me advice. He gave examples of people who had made bad decisions. Just look at your cousin. Do you want to end up like that? He was very intelligent, and his approach worked well. Story 43. As I tried to sneak out of the house on a Tuesday night, my mother said to 12-year-old me, "Do not get anyone pregnant." Story 44. My dad can still deliver a quietly devastating, "I'm very disappointed in you." One time he said, "I'd say it's not like you to do such a thing, but turns out it is." Story 45. Before you make a decision, ask yourself, what is the worst that could happen? For example, driving under the influence. You could kill or seriously injure yourself or others. Saying something mean behind a friend's back could ruin a friendship. Story 46. My parents did not learn about most of the questionable decisions I made as a teenager until about a decade later, and only because I chose to tell them. I deliberately kept as many secrets from them as I could. I felt then that it was the one thing I could control. That is what happens with helicopter parents. The more they try to force their way in, the more their children try to push them out. Story 47. You will not be able to move to America if you have a record. Story 48. My parents trusted me and told me so. It made me feel that I had something to lose if I made bad choices. Story 49. Nothing. My parents were always angry and yelled about everything. Most teenagers do not listen to their parents. Story 50. Dad was gone. Mom's mind was gone. It was my year 8 science teacher who pulled me aside. He had this conversation with many students, and he spoke to me several times. He told me about the bird who soils his own nest. When chicks are young, they naturally back up to the edge and poop out of the nest. Occasionally, a bird does not bother and soils its own nest. That causes the nest to become dirty, diseased, and unpleasant to live in. Right now, you are that bird. Stop soiling your own nest, okay? He was more eloquent in his words, but that was his main point, and it had impact. Story 51. My mom found out I was smoking. Instead of yelling, she looked at me and said, "I can't stop you, but I hope you know you're worth more than this." She walked away. It was a gut punch and more effective than any punishment would have been. Story 52. Nothing really. They are terrible people who should not have had children, much less married in the first place. They are two miserable people spreading their generational trauma to their children while making excuses and pretending they are good parents. I have considered suicide many times. The only reason I have not is that if I die before either of them, I would never get the relief of watching them lowered into the ground. It is that bad. I wish them no peace. If you are feeling suicidal or in crisis, please seek help now. In the United States, call or text 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you are elsewhere, contact your local emergency services or a crisis hotline. Story 53. I honestly do not recall my parents saying anything about some of the bad choices I made as a teenager. They kind of let it happen, and I steered toward less harmful bad choices. They were permissive even when those choices inconvenienced them. They basically let me channel drinking and disorder into recording stupid things in their basement at 3 a.m. with my friends, and mostly it all sorted itself out. The drinking may not have stopped, but otherwise things improved. Story 54. Not my parents, my older brother. I used to harbor a lot of anger toward people who hurt me and would act spitefully in retaliation, often doing worse than they had. That changed when I did it to my brother, made him cry, and he asked through tears why I was so spiteful. Story 55. Mom would always say, "Remember who you are," whenever I left to go somewhere. Story 56. If they said they were disappointed in me, it crushed my soul. Being mad or angry was okay, though. Story 57. My dad didn't yell. He just quietly said, "I'm not angry. I'm just scared for you." The silence after that sentence was louder than any shouting match. It was the first time I realized my choices could hurt him. The panda cried that day. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.